Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. Christmas in My Heart is a beautiful, beautiful book. Zane Grey and his cookbook and Zane Grey's huge volumes here of reviews and pictures of a reception last night. Now, what do they all have to do with our guest? Let's check in. Joe Wheeler, welcome to Journeys and Journals. Start with number one here.
Well, thank you. This is one that I never thought there'd be another. I never thought there'd be any at all to begin with, but I had an editor who wouldn't give up, and she said, "What kind of stories do you do?" And I said, "Well, they're Christmas stories that have the spiritual dimension. What else?" Well, I said, "You can't read them without crying." And so she said, "But you've only written two like that?" And I said, "Well, I've collected them all my life. I had a mother that raised me on them." So out of that came this particular book in 1992, Christmas in My Heart. And eventually, by the time we did another collection, they were brave enough to put a 2 on it because they thought, who knows? This may do well enough, so someday they may have a 3. And you have a 14 there, and the latest is 18, and it's still alive. So they don't...
So you wrote some of them, but you compiled?
I usually write one in each collection. The rest of them I compile. The rest of them I get from wherever.
What about the gorgeous pictures in here, these old pictures?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question because almost none of the stories that I have their own illustrations. And when they put this particular book together, Penny Estes Wheeler, no relation to me, who was the acquisitions editor then at Review and Herald, and Susan Harvey, they went out to lunch. And they said, okay, what is as timeless as Joe's stories in terms of a cover? Well, where Currier Knives was concerned, it was the ultimate Christmas type cover during the 1800s. So they say it's got to be Currier Knives. But Currier Knives were horizontal rather than vertical, whereas snow scenes were concerned. Okay, it's got to be a horizontal book. All right, what is as timeless as Joe's stories and Currier Knives inside, illustration-wise? Oh, it's got to be the woodcut. So I got locked into a look with these woodcuts. So today, we ran out of the woodcuts that Review and Herald had after 2. So I had to face a moment of reckoning. If the series was to go beyond 2, I had to get off my duff and start searching. And so since that time, my wife and I have spent probably at least $500,000 on illustrations, on buying up old-time magazines before 1923 so that they are public domain.
Pre-camera.
They were just hand-etched woodcuts. And so when, let's say I'm putting together a new collection, like when I get back home to Colorado, we're going to do the Christmas in My Heart collection for 19th consecutive year. And so I then sketch out the storylines. How many people are in the story, what the ages of the kids are, what kind of an environment, whether it's mountain or oceanside or wherever it might be, anything that's going to give me hooks. And then once I do that, then I start picking up these bound volumes of Harper's or Little Folk or St. Nicholas, or I have so many different bound magazine series that I draw from. And I just start turning page after page after page after page. And it usually takes me about a month and a half of 12-hour days to find something that would jump out at you. Like this is number 14, for instance. And this picture here, I would say, oh, that has to be in that story. And so I'm saying this so people now, when they do pick up our books, they will have some appreciation for what it takes to match an illustration with a storyline.
Now these are wood block
They call them woodcuts, because if you get a magnifying glass, you'll see lines because they are
chiseled.
hand etched. Yeah.
My dad had linoleum prints, but on this one, I can see that she's got striped shirt. That's just little wood carving.
Little woodcuts.
Well, now this is Christmas in the Heart. How did you jump to Zane Grey's magazine? And Zane Grey, well, I got the cookbook from Claudette Pruitt, who just happened to be a river person. She would visit that Zane Grey cabin with the Haas family.
Yes, I corresponded with the gentleman, the heir of Levi Strauss, the Haas. I forget what his first name was, but yeah, as you know, he is now, the property has moved on over to BLM.
Isn't that wonderful? That's something, and they're trying to save the cabin.
Yes.
And eventually make it a destination, a place you can go and rent.
We're wanting to bring up our Zane Grey attendees at the Gold Beach Convention next June. At the end of the convention, we want to have an expedition into Winkle Bar Cabin.
Oh, I think I'd like to be along. We just maybe I could. Well, now the Zane Grey magazine, and you're the.
I'm the executive editor and co-founder, and I am usually in each magazine with something that I've written.
Right. Here's this whole story about Betty, and that was so interesting. Zane Grey's children, Romer.
Right. And by the way, in the nature stories that we've been talking about, that I have the dog stories, the cat, the horse, the wild animal, the animal heroes, and now Littlest Animals. I've anthologized 3 of Zane Grey stories in that series.
Oh, wonderful.
Like Wildfire, the lead one, is one of Zane Grey's stories in that one.
And this is kid stuff.
All age groups, but kids love these.
Every Christmas, Heidi, my niece, reads a story. And then there's the latest. This is the very latest last night when you had a book signing.
Oh, that was so much
fun. Thank
you
so much for our new books. And this was at the Brewery Restaurant in Grants Pass. And, while Dr. Wheeler was here, I couldn't stop making appointments for him to address different people. And this is the best of the bunch because we're talking to you here on Better Life TV all over Southern Oregon, Northern California, and hopefully very soon clear to Portland. Zane Grey. Why Zane Grey?
Well, because I wrote my doctoral dissertation on him, and I was asked by an Associated Press reporter once, what does it feel like to be the world's foremost authority on Zane Grey? And I tried to think of something that wouldn't sound too self-serving. And finally I said, well, it's sort of like the Russian proverb. He that dances with a bear doesn't quit just because he gets tired. And what happens is you become a prisoner of that information. And I couldn't live my own life if I wanted to now because I am tied to that information, and anybody who has any question on Zane Grey, it usually ends up in our corner. And so now Zane Grey has become an integral part of my life and who I am.
And you have other parts. You were a professor over here teaching what?
English and communication and history.
Those are handy if you're going to be a writer. Well, this I had to share. He wrote the letter after Carolyn Sutton had introduced me to him as a new person to me. And his letterhead is all printed.
Yes.
But notice, folks, it's all handwritten. Why?
Oh, I'm an old fossil. I love writing as opposed to typing on a computer screen. And my ideas only come with a pilot pen. And I have to write these out by hand, and I scribble on the side, and I scribble on the other side, and my poor wife Connie has to decode it all and put it on computer. But to me, there is something magic about writing by hand. And what's intriguing about letters is letters are almost becoming extinct today, thanks to email and text messaging. And what I have, it used to be that the ultimate in prestige was a typewritten letter. Oh, if you got a typewritten letter, that's upscale. Then it became passé. And after a while, it was all computer generated. And now the ultimate prestige letter is a handwritten one again.
You can't just put a font in there
That's
in
right.
the computer and make it look handwritten like, "Dear Bernie," these letters come.
So many people say, "Oh, you wrote me a personal letter, handwritten." Yeah.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, I brought so many old things, flour sacks. I'm sure that's all part of Zane Grey's trips down the river. They had to take their own food.
Oh, you have the Zane Grey monogram on there. How about that?
Then I have all the old-fashioned jeans because those people really wore out their jeans. I swear.
Oh,
These.
That's in vogue today. They will buy them new like that.
Oh my goodness. But you've told us about the Umpqua River, about the Rogue, about history, about how these people went down there with so many people to feed and hunt and fish. But I'm more interested in you right now. You have come to Southern Oregon with a real eye for history. Why is Zane Grey and this part of natural, 4 or 5 counties that you really are interested in? I mean, who would have guessed that the river would bind us all together?
Well, you know, in the early days, the rivers were the center of life. All of the towns that became anything at all were on rivers. That was how you got your transportation there, your supplies there. And only as our society matured did we think of rivers as recreation, because our pioneers had little time for recreation. They had to work these long hours.
And row your boat.
That's right.
That was the only way you did rivers.
So it was because of that Zane Grey was his generation was one of the first to really be able to do recreation. And so he came along at the perfect time to immortalize the Oregon rivers.
And the Umpqua he loved?
He loved
North Umpqua.
The North Umpqua he loved, but he discovered it after the Rogue. And the Rogue is the one that he came to year after year after year. And then in later life, he started going also to the North Umpqua. But in terms of the chronology of his life that I have sketched out, the Rogue, I've documented twice as many trips to the Rogue as the North Umpqua.
Every year, like going back to the Rogue. Here's the Rogue River feud. And as people tell me, it's not one of his best, but it is a very interesting book. And The Cabin was one of his favorites.
It's what I would call a romantic idyll, in which it is the ultimate tribute to a female fisherman in there. And essentially, it is a love story tied to fishing, tied to the Rogue. And it is totally unique in Zane Grey's canon of writing. And he was lucky to have special artists. This is one of the best. His name was Charles Schultz. I think he's still alive. And it's what they call a wraparound cover, in which the design of the illustration goes clear around. And so consequently, these are becoming more and more valuable because here you have not only a front cover of Oregon, but you have the Rogue that is spread out over 2 covers.
Oh, I wonder what bar this is. Thanks for pointing that out. That's news to me.
Now, I would like, before we close this segment, I would like to share a story for the family.
Oh, please do.
This is from Christmas in My Heart, the very first one. And it is one that was written by Fulton Oursler. And of all of the Christmas stories we have ever written, or either written or anthologized, this is one that people love the most.
Too hanky?
It's probably you're going to need them all.
Okay, go for it. Christmas in the Heart by Joe Wheeler.
And it's titled A String of Beads, A String of Blue Beads by Fulton Oursler. Pete Richards was the loneliest man in town on the day Jean Grace opened his door. You may have seen something in the newspapers about the incident at the time it happened, although neither his name nor hers was published, nor was the full story told as I tell it here. Pete's shop had come down to him from his grandfather. The little front window was strewn with a disarray of old-fashioned things, bracelets and lockets worn in the days before the Civil War, gold rings and silver boxes, images of jade and ivory, porcelain figurines. On this winter's afternoon, a child was standing there, her forehead against the glass, earnest and enormous eyes studying each discarded treasure, as if she were looking for something quite special. Finally, she straightened up with a satisfied air and entered the store. The shadowy interior of Pete Richards' establishment was even more cluttered than his show window. Shelves were stacked with jewel caskets, dueling pistols, clocks, and lamps, and the floor was heaped with andirons and mandolins and things hard to find a name for. Behind the counter stood Pete himself, a man not more than 30, but with hair already turning gray. There was a bleak air about him as he looked at the small customer who flattened her ungloved hands on the counter. "Mister," she began, "would you please let me look at that string of blue beads in the window?" Pete parted the draperies and lifted out a necklace. The turquoise stones gleamed brightly against the pallor of his palm as he spread the ornament before her. "They're just perfect," said the child, entirely to herself. "Will you wrap them up pretty for me, please?" Pete studied her with a stony air. "Are you buying them for someone?" "They're for my big sister. She takes care of me. You see, this will be the first Christmas since Mother died. I've been looking for the most wonderful Christmas present for her." "How much money do you have?" asked Pete warily. She had been busily untying the knots in a handkerchief, and now she poured out a handful of pennies on the counter. "I emptied my bank," she explained simply. Pete Richards looked at her thoughtfully. Then he carefully drew back the necklace. The price tag was visible to him, but not to her. How could he tell her? The trusting look of her blue eyes smote him like the pain of an old wound. "Just a minute," he said, and turned toward the back of the store. Over his shoulder he called, "What's your name?" He was very busy about something. "Jean Grace." When Pete returned to where Jean Grace waited, a package lay in his hand, wrapped in scarlet paper and tied with a bow of green ribbon. "There you are," he said shortly. "Don't lose it on the way home." She smiled happily at him over her shoulder as she ran out the door. Through the window he watched her go while desolation flooded his thoughts. Something about Jean Grace and her string of beads had stirred him to the depths of a grief that would not stay buried. The child's hair was wheat yellow, her eyes sea blue. And once upon a time, not long before, Pete had been in love with a girl with hair of that same yellow and with eyes just as blue, and the turquoise necklace was to have been hers. But there had come a rainy night, a truck skidding on a slippery road, and the life was crushed out of his dream. Since then, Pete Richards had lived too much with his grief and solitude. He was politely attentive to customers, but after business hours, his world seemed irrevocably empty. He was trying to forget in a self-pitying haze that deepened day by day. The blue eyes of Jean Grace jolted him into acute remembrance of what he had lost. The pain of it made him recoil from the exuberance of holiday shoppers. During the next 10 days, trade was brisk. Chattering women swarmed in, fingering trinkets, trying to bargain. When the last customer had gone, late on Christmas Eve, he sighed with relief. It was over for another year. But for Pete Richards, the night was not quite over. The door opened and a young woman hurried in. With an inexplicable start, he realized that she looked familiar, yet he could not remember when or where he had seen her before. Her hair was golden yellow, and her large eyes were blue. Without speaking, she drew from her purse a package loosely unwrapped in its red paper, a bow of green ribbon with it. Presently, the string of blue beads lay gleaming again before him. "Does this come from your shop?" she asked. Pete raised his eyes to her and answered softly, "Yes, it did." "Are the stones real?" "Yes. Not the finest quality, but real." "Can you remember who it was you sold them to?" "She was a small girl. Her name was Jean. She bought them for her older sister's Christmas present." "How much are they worth?" "The price," he told her solemnly, "is always a confidential matter between the seller and the customer. But Jean has never had more than a few pennies of spending money. How could she pay for them?" Pete was folding the gay paper back into its creases, rewrapping the little package just as neatly as before. "She paid the biggest price anyone can ever pay," he said. "She gave all she had." There was a silence then that filled the little curio shop. He saw the faraway steeple. A bell began ringing. The sound of the distant chiming, the little package lying on the counter, the question in the eyes of the girl, and the strange feeling of renewal struggling unreasonably in the heart of the man. All had come to be because of the love of a child. But why did you do it? He held out the gift in his hand. "It's already Christmas morning," he said, "and it's my misfortune that I have no one to give anything to. Will you let me see you home and wish you a Merry Christmas at your door?" And so, to the sound of many bells and in the midst of happy people, Pete Richards and a girl whose name he had yet to hear walked out into the beginning of the great day that brings hope into the world for us all.
How many hankies is that one?
I swear that one unglues me. It's probably a 10.
I didn't have a hanky, but I had this priceless flour sack, and it worked just fine. Oh, thank you. I can see why when this was read at our Christmas, not that story, but a different one. It was several hanky one then too. Oh, how very, very glad I am that you've come to Rogue Country to share not only Zane Grey and this other history that we've been talking about, but a little taste of Christmas.
Well, see, my mother filled me with those stories. And my mother, being an elocutionist, which is a term people don't even know today, being an elocutionist, she was a master at reading. She never misenunciated. And there was a time when people did that in public and with their families. And what I'm hoping is that we can bring it back, bring that day back.
Oh, I just love it. I love it. It fits right in with the story catcher.
Oh, that was, yeah, I get letters all over from that article about what we do with stories.
Yep, and this comes from Renewed and Ready, which is a senior for us older
For those
folk.
of us who confess to being ARP age.
You know, you've taken us to fun places and laughing places the last few shows, and I just want to thank you so much for coming out west, way out west, and the trip down the Rogue, we'll have to wait until next year maybe, and we'll come up the Rogue. I'm looking forward to our next visit, and maybe I can go to that Zane Grey convention. Is there a chance?
I hope you do. Yes, we'd love to have you. We'd like to have as many folk from the region here who love Gray, love the Old West, and wouldn't mind getting together with people who are wacky and just love life, and they love being together.
A picture of them that all getting together. And in that little town of Gold Beach, there's a bookstore clear full of his original stuff.
I'm looking forward to it.
On the second floor with the big price tags. Well, I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I just love learning about you and getting acquainted with your material, and I hope you have too. Bye for now.